I'm Katie Price, Curator of Collections here at the Williams College Museum, and I am thrilled to have you all here tonight, and especially happy to have our two very special guests with us tonight, Christopher Cerf and Lucy Mulroney. This is the third and final program in our series for Warhol by the Book this spring. I'm really excited to have Chris and Lucy here tonight. It's because of Lucy, really, that this show is here, so we can all thank her. Lucy visited me in the spring of 2011, almost exactly 4 years ago today, actually. And she is the one responsible for getting me to think more about our really important holdings by that were given to us by an alumnus, Richard Holmes, who graduated in 1946. He gave us a lot of really wonderful early book material, a lot of sort of unique work. And Lucy told me, she believes strongly that these books constituted a really significant intellectual component of Holmes's collection. I don't know if you remember emailing me that after you left, but it was really sort of highly unusual for Holmes to be collecting books at this time period and thinking of Warhol in this way. And really, until Lucy, no art historian or anyone else for that matter, had acknowledged the importance of publishing to Warhol's artistic practice. Lucy's important work in this area has done wonders to remedy this oversight by urging a reconsideration of the centrality of publishing to Warhol's visual art, and really suggesting that we think in new ways about the category of the artist's book. So thank you, Lucy, for this show, for getting us to think about Warhol in new ways. Lucy has become a friend and a generous colleague over those years that we've known each other, and she's currently serving as the interim senior director of the Special Collections Research Center at Syracuse University, where she also holds an appointment in the Department of Art and Music Histories. At Syracuse, Lucy is charged with the selection, acquisition, and scholarly appraisal of rare books and archival collections in a variety of media. In addition to curating exhibitions and teaching from the collections, Lucy oversees the intellectual programming for the center and development of its digital programs. Her research is wide-ranging and includes modern and contemporary art in the U.S., Europe, and Latin America, the history and preservation of photography, film, and performance-based works, avant-garde and independent publishing, utopian communities, and the aesthetic expression of radical ideologies, queer theory, and the history of illustration processes and design. It's quite a mouthful, but Lucy, in it. That's right, dabbles in a lot of different areas. And I'm really happy to report that Lucy is currently finishing a book on Warhol's publications, right now entitled Andy Warhol Publisher, which was the subject of her doctoral dissertation at the University of Rochester. So we're really thrilled to have Lucy here. And Christopher Cerf, who also has a varied background. So thrilled to have you here tonight. Chris is a collaborator, as you all know, with Warhol on his seminal 1967 publication, The Index book, which is on view in one of the cabinets in this gallery, and which will be the subject of their talk tonight. Chris is an author, record and TV producer, composer and lyricist, humorist, and co-founder and president of the educational media production company Serious Thinking, where he co-created and serves as co-executive producer of the multiple award-winning children's literacy show Between the Lions, which recently completed its 10th season on PBS. Chris has won 3 Emmys and 2 Grammys just for his musical contributions to a program that we all probably have known and loved, Sesame Street, which some of us grew up on. He has written over 300 songs for that program since the show's debut in 1970. Right.
We were a few a year. Eventually adds up to 300. You live long enough.
We were sharing stories last night, and some of them that we know very well were written by Chris. He was a senior editor at Random House, the publisher that his father, Bennett Cerf, founded. While there, Chris worked with diverse authors like George Plimpton, Dr. Seuss, and of course Warhol. Chris was also a charter contributing editor of National Lampoon. He has won 2 Emmys for outstanding writing in children's television, and in 2010, Chris was awarded the Harold W. McGraw Prize for his contributions to American education. For all of his background in TV, music, and publishing, Chris is perhaps best known for his work as an author and satirist, and has many publications under his belt. He co-edited the Politically Correct Dictionary with Henry Beard, and The Experts Speak, the definitive compendium of authoritative misinformation with Victor Navasky. In November 2012, Simon & Schuster published Chris and Henry Beard's Encyclopedia Paranoica, and in, I guess, is it still next month, that a new Cerf Beard collaboration entitled Spanglish, the Definitive Dictionary of Deceptive Language, will be published by Blue Rider Press. He tells me that they promise it will teach readers how to succeed in business and politics and everything else without really lying. So, without further ado, I welcome Chris and Lucy to Williams.
Thank you. Well, I am so excited to be here. Katie, thank you for that wonderful introduction. We were talking today about how did we encounter each other? When did I call you? How did this all come to be? And it's been an amazing experience that, I was here in 2011 and going through this wonderful material, looking at the index books and the dummies. And that was following right after having visited the Random House records at Columbia University, and where Chris's editorial notes and files and everything are kept. And the luckiest thing happened, which was you're listed in the phone book, which is now online. And after seeing your name in the Random House records, and because your name is nowhere on, well, it's on the book, but it's hidden. Yeah. And then coming here, I thought, okay, well, don't be nervous. Just call them up. You have to do this. This is what real historians do if they have the chance. And you have been the most generous and wonderful and fun person to work with. I visited Chris in his home in New York City. He invited me there to conduct the interview and pulled out some things.
I brought some along.
Yeah. And so we had a great conversation, and I learned a lot about the book, and I have some questions to ask you. Some answers I know, some I don't. To share with you all, but I just wanted to let you know that that's how we met each other, was just a random phone call.
Oh, random indeed.
I said, are you the Christopher Cerf who worked on Andy Warhol book at Random House? And he said, well, yeah, I haven't thought about that in 40 years.
But I can't thank you enough either. It's been so much fun to remember all this, and a great experience, obviously, that we'll talk about.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the very beginning. The earliest letter that I was able to find in the Random House records dates from April of 1966, at which time Chris was 25 years old. And it's from Alan Rinzler, who was then an agent with the Black Star Publishing Company. They're also like a photo agency. And he writes to Chris and says that Warhol is under a contract with Black Star to do a book, and they'd like it to be published by Random House. And so I wondered if you would tell us all what you were doing at Random House, what your job was. Who was Christopher Cerf in 1966? Okay,
well, as I say, I don't know how I managed to get this job. The fact that my father started the company probably helped. But I did have a marvelous job, because my mom had started beginner books with Dr. Seuss at about the same time. And my dad wasn't sure whether I would be better working on kids' books or adult books. And so we decided that I could work on children's books with Dr. Seuss part of the time, and as long as the books weren't really adult, because I was still basically as childish as I still am, or childlike, I got to work on what were called special projects books for grown-ups, and that included the more strange or pop culture books of the time. So I got to work with Abbie Hoffman, which was an incredibly exciting experience. He wrote that book mostly lying half naked on the floor of my office, which led to it. This is a bit of a digression, but I should say that one day my dad was showing a very stuffy friend of his around the office, and they got to my office, and Abbie was there smoking a joint with his shirt off, lying on the floor, scribbling on a yellow pad. And Abbie knew that what was about to happen, so my father started out saying, "That's not my..." And Abbie looked up and said, "Hi, Pop." So I had a wild job at Random House, and it was incredible fun. But I don't think any of it was wilder than this book, which, as you said, came across my desk when Alan Rinzler, who was working with Rolling Stone a lot from his Black Star position, wrote me. I also, and this is rather important, had another job that came about at Random House when a man named Wally Hunt, who will come up later in the conversation, but Wally had a company called Graphics International, and they designed pop-ups for ads, and he had done a lot of it, pop-ups that were in Hallmark cars, and also that would be in magazines. You would open them up and a pop-up would come up. And he had the idea, Wally, that we could do riddles that way, where the answer would pop up. And my dad said, "Oh, this is something I bet my crazy son Christopher would like to work on." So Wally and I started a whole series of pop-up books at Random House. And they were different from old pop-ups in that there was always something that you had to pull a tab in order to find something out. It was really like what I eventually did at Sesame Street, but without television, where you would get animation by turning the page or pushing something. Right. And that's relevant to this because, as we'll get to, when Andy saw his Popup books, he said, "Oh, I've got to have those in my book." Yeah. And that's why this book is filled with them.
Right. Well, one thing maybe for everyone to know, that the first pop-up book that Random House published was just the year before. In 1965, your dad's book of pop-up riddles was the first pop-up book that was published by Random House, and it was an interesting co-publication or with Maxwell House Coffee. You could buy one with two coffee labels.
That was because, yes, it was a premium deal. That was one of the ways that we paid for it. Maxwell House paid for a lot of what's called paper engineering. They paid, we couldn't have afforded, I wouldn't put it that way. Random House was afraid it wouldn't sell enough to pay for all that paper engineering. So Wally made a deal with Maxwell House where they would do a premium sale. If you bought 2 jars of instant coffee and tore the little label out, you could get a free, or I guess a discount copy.
I think.
A discount copy of it. And the book actually did really well, so we ended up doing lots of them. And when I got to Sesame Street, we did a lot of Sesame Street pop-ups too. So all my weird projects sort of fit together, though nobody believes that, but I'm convinced they do.
I believe it. I believe it. So I have with me a copy of the letter from Alan Rinzler, and it's clear from the start of what Alan is saying here in his letter to you that this isn't going to be an ordinary book. And so, to share with you what he writes, he says, "Dear Chris Cerf, Andy is under contract to us to provide materials, collaboration, and design for a book under his authorship to be entitled something like The World of Andy Warhol. The idea is to chronicle his activities, the films, the art, the music, the personalities, and at the same time create a Warholian, and then object is in quotes, in itself. Consequently, we will take snatches from the enclosed tapes and the novel." So that's referring to a novel, which is in the case over there. There were pieces from that, and also transcripts from some of the tapes. And Andy Warhol's tape recorders in this exhibit also.
Well, I should add, if I can interrupt for a second, that everybody involved with Andy's factory, as it was called, the studio, tended to tape things.
They all did.
They all did. Really. And there was endless amounts of really incredibly boring tape, actually. But that was part of the idea.
Right. It is so boring, and yet they were all taping each other, and different people had the job of transcribing, and
that's right.
What craziness. So there were some of those really boring tapes, and the novel based on tapes. The press book, which is the book of the clippings, because I think Pat Hackett may have been in charge.
Yes, I think so.
Of the clipping book of all the terrible, mostly terrible reviews that Warhol received for his exhibit. So, and then juxtapose all of this with appropriate pictures in a design which will coincide with the spirit of things. So the teeny bopper segment, for example, might be printed very small. But intact because they're teeny. It does read like Ionesco. The Velvet's conversation, on the other hand, can be enormously printed, perhaps only a sentence or two. I also want to have a page that folds or clips out and made into one of your own, like your own Warhol piece that you could take from the book. A strong selling point, I think. And there are all other sorts of things we can do with type and design. But nowhere in this letter does Alan mention pop-ups.
Well, because he never would have thought of it.
Yeah.
And nor would I at first.
So can you tell the story of how pop-ups?
Yes, Andy came to my office, which was quite a wonderful experience. And the first thing he saw was that I had Popup Books in the office, and his face lit up. It was like a child with a toy, really. And he opened one, and there was a little airplane in it. And he said, "Oh, I want that." And I said, "Oh, you mean we can make a pop-up like that?" And he said, "No." No. And I said, "Well, what did you mean?" And he said, "I want that plane in the book." And I actually brought a copy that still works of that, I think. But you can see some of this over in the case there. But, well, this was another pop-up he found. This castle was actually in another book altogether. And he just decided, I want that too. Yeah. But we actually pasted faces of some of Andy's collaborators into the picture, because it says were attacked constantly, because they were actually.
They were.
But I was looking for that little plane, but I can't remember quite.
And the original books, which were in your office, are in the Random House archive at Columbia University. So going there and coming across these weird little promotional foldouts, and that was from a Robin Hood book, a Hallmark kind of gift book.
I don't remember
oh my
the
God, there's the
I can't
castle.
find the plane, but it's in there.
But then you explain this story that, he came by and just said, "Oh, can I have that?" It's really incredible.
Well, I think that's the way he really did a lot of things, not just for this book, but he would find something and love it.
Yeah.
And it became part of his world, basically.
Yeah. So after the first meeting with Warhol in your office, there were a bunch of other editorial brainstorming sessions at the factory. Do you want to talk about what that was like, going to the factory and who was there?
It was amazing. It was a little intimidating. As you said, I was in my early 20s, and I was afraid I was going to say the wrong thing, or that they wouldn't think I was hip enough or whatever.
Yeah.
And basically everybody was incredibly nice. Some people were a little strange. But and an important part of the story that comes up now is that when Alan Rinzler from Black Star wrote the original letter, he had the rights to a group of photographs by a man named Nat Finkelstein. And the thought was that we would use a lot of those pictures in the book. But when I got to the factory, it turned out that nobody liked Nat Finkelstein. In fact, they were furious at him for selling these photos. So a fellow named Billy Linick, who is much better known now as Billy Name, but Billy, who turned out to be really the nicest guy of them all, I think, and we got to be really good friends. But Billy sort of said, you know, we have other pictures too, and I took some of them, and he said, oh no, we like Billy's pictures better. So some of Nat's pictures did get in, and Nat, well, go ahead.
I was going to, and there's another photographer too who you became close with, Stephen Shore. I mean, he must
I knew
have
him
been
anyway. Yeah.
Oh, you did. Okay, so
he took amazing photographs beyond these, and he took a lot of baseball photographs, art photographs, and I'm a big sports fan, so I have a bunch of those in my apartment. But I had met him before. I didn't know he was part of this till I got there.
Yeah. I think he, at about this time, maybe 64, 65, was first starting to hang out at the factory, and now, I mean, he's an incredibly important American photographer, but also, I don't know if he must have been in his 20s also. He was quite, maybe even 19, I don't know, quite young.
And then he helped start a magazine called The Real World that I was part of later on too.
Wow. So I have some notes from the editorial meetings from your office, but before we get to those, I think it's worth saying something about how what was behind what you were thinking about the pop-ups. I mean, they were totally fun, but there was an idea about revolutionizing the way children read and learn, and there was another side to why Random House wanted to do pop-up books in the first place.
I think we tend to exaggerate the importance of things we did 50 years ago. And the main thing was that they were fun.
Yeah.
But Beginner Books was a serious, I mean, I'm sure most of you know Beginner Books. That's Cat in the Hat was the first one. And my mom and Ted Geisel, Dr. Seuss, had the idea that he didn't really have to stop with one. And my mom basically persuaded him to keep doing it and to bring other authors in. And the idea there was to do books that were just as much fun as other books, but had vocabularies that kids could actually read and learn, so you could learn to read from it. I had the idea that pop-up books could work that way too. And I mentioned earlier that we could have fun by setting up a question. It could be an addition problem even, and then when you'd pull the tab you'd get the answer, but also something funny would happen that would illustrate the answer. Of course, if we'd had television we wouldn't have had to do that. And that is sort of the way I got to Sesame Street. When Sesame Street started, I knew a lot of the people that were starting it, and when I first saw the Muppets I fell in love with them, of course, as everyone else does. But because I had the experience at Random House, they knew I knew about reading and trying to make reading fun, and I ended up going over there. But that's another story entirely.
It is. And I think now, having met you and learning about your career and all the things that you've done, this book, for me, seems to totally combine like National Lampoon. Oh,
there's a lot of National Lampoon.
You know, because this book is so filled with inside jokes. I mean, every page, like the castle. I mean, I think that I sit and I look through the book with you and I get some jokes, and then I sit with Billy Naiman, he turns through the pages and there's a whole nother set of jokes, and I think every person who worked on this book or was part of that circle, if you were to sit with them and look through the book, you'd get, it's just hilarious, but everybody's got their own like list of jokes they read in there.
Well, where Andy was, I mean, Andy really was a genius, even though he's so much fun and we make all these jokes. But I think he knew when something should be found. And that's the best I can do to describe it. And a lot of things that happened in this book were totally accidental, but there were many other accidents that he didn't think were worth recording. Yeah. It's just when he liked one that he kept it in. And he had an incredible way of telling the truth through accidents. Absolutely. So the title page of this book, there were arguments about whose name went first. There were arguments about whose name should be listed and what credits they should get. But Andy made us keep all the typographical changes in, all the copy editor's notes. He said, oh, leave that. So you can see where names were transposed, you can see where things were crossed out and some other title was put in.
Well, why don't we jump to that then and look at I don't know if it's in here, but I have a copy also. I can
it's
hold
probably
up
easier to find. It's a little hard to see this, but maybe we can pass it around.
Sure. But I wondered if you would say, I mean, we talked about The title of the book is Andy Warhol's Index, and then the word book is in parentheses at the end. And the story behind that is that Billy Name didn't like, or others at the factory didn't like, the idea of titling it The World of Andy Warhol.
Well, that was much too commercial and straightforward a title. He would never have gone for that.
And so it seems as though Billy Name was the one to come up with this title, Andy Warhol's Index, which refers...
So I would bet you Paul Morrissey would say that he came up with it.
Yeah, so someone at the factory came up with the title, Andy Warhol's Index, which refers to the Catholic Church's index of forbidden films. And so the whole idea was that this was Andy Warhol's index, but you were supposed to watch the movies, not watch the movies, because they were so bad.
But it also was the index of his life. This is a way to see the factory. So it was a double meaning.
And it's so his whole process with the silk screen and the stamping and the blotted line drawing are all indexical practices, so it makes so much sense. But okay, so there, maybe if you wanted to talk about the name, who's on this title page, and is their name crossed out or
I mentioned Nat Finkelstein earlier. It originally said with photographs by Nat Finkelstein and Billy Name, and Billy came in and crossed out Nat Finkelstein's name, and so we actually sent the dummy to Black Star, and Nat Finkelstein threatened to sue me for leaving his name off. So I had to write in. I put it back in originally, but they took it out again, and finally, this is my handwriting, I found to my amazement, saying several photographs by Nat Finkelstein were added, and factory photos by Billy Name is what it says as the main title. Then Stephen Shore came in, a poet, some of you may know because he's a good poet, named Gerard Malanga, was part of the factory scene in those days, but they got mad at him, so they crossed his name out and put Stephen Shore's name in. Yeah. And I got a letter from Stephen Shore the other day, so I know that Stephen Shore actually wrote his own name here, because that's his handwriting.
Yeah. So, and then where your name and Alan's name appear.
Yeah, Alan wanted his name put above mine, but Andy didn't do it. He just put the transpose mark here.
Yeah, the little
and
arrow.
left mine first. So. But it's a big joke. It looks like everybody was fighting, except for Nat Finkelstein, who.
Right.
And Nat was. I guess he won't come get me. He was a little paranoid. Yeah. And for years he would call me up in the middle of the night and say, "I'm coming now." So I'm always scared to mention this story, but we'll see if he's still alive. Word will get back to him.
And then on the edge it has this funny little text, which reminded me of the quotes around the galleries here. It says, "Well, Andy loves mistakes. This wasn't rehearsed."
Right.
So were these changes made at the last minute, right before it went to press?
They were made. Well, they made. Now you still get them, but you get them on a computer now. Mm-hmm. But they would actually print the galley proofs for you to make changes on, and that's what this was. But instead of making the changes, they just photographed the galley proof and made it the actual title page. And then we added this line of Andy makes mistakes, which somebody in the factory wrote. But when Andy saw it, he didn't like it. He said that they should figure that out for themselves. Mm-hmm. So we were supposed to take it out in later printings, but I don't think there were any later printings because the book was impossible to make. It was made in Japan and
speaking of Japan, there's a Japanese person's name on here with some there's a story behind that.
Well, his name isn't actually there. The man who made all these pop-ups and made them for our other pop-up books too was a wonderful Japanese artist named Akihito Shirakawa, who did not speak English very well at all. And I guess when they asked him to sign his name in Japanese to put here, he asked, "Do you want it to say left to right or top to bottom?" Because he could write it either way. And whoever was talking to him said so adamantly left to right that he actually wrote left to right instead of writing his name, and we didn't know that till much later. So this actually says left to right here.
So I'm picturing you, Alan Rinzler, David Paul, who's the one
the designer.
the designer.
Did a brilliant job on this book.
Paul Morrissey, Ondine, Nico, Stephen Shore, Gerard Malonga, maybe Nat Finkelstein, and
he never was in the same room with them.
and Billy Name at the factory. And so now I want to read some of these notes that we've got a picture of all these people together in the silver factory.
Oh, sure.
Oh, sure, of course.
Can you start it? Sure. Great.
So this is from March 31st, 1967. So that's only because the original letter is December of 66, so it's not, you guys moved pretty quickly on this. Yeah. So it's a meeting with Warhol, and these are the notes. It looks like David, Paul, and Alan were there. And here it says, people, here are some of the ideas I think came out of our Thursday evening meeting. So these are the ideas for the book of what to put in them. One is a pop-up Brillo box, and there's an asterisk saying, deluxe edition to include a Brillo pad. Pop-up factory, which I think may have been what was replaced with the castle.
Yes, well,
it's better looking.
Yes, well, probably.
Transparent record over a picture of Nico. Andy loved this. Black and white, question mark, composite question mark, flickering lenticular 3D cover.
Which we did, and I actually brought a sample. This is the final design, but it was not read in the final book. But you can actually, I don't know if you can see that it moves, but it's kind of neat.
Crossword puzzle that doesn't work. And this keeps...
That would have been something you should have done. Naomi Pasikov is here, who designs wonderful crossword puzzles, but hers work.
And this crossword puzzle keeps coming up in these internal memos and correspondence in the Random House record. It came to be some kind of issue, and eventually it's not in the book. So
we never could find anyone, because I didn't know Naomi yet, although I knew her husband Jay at school. Who's the astronomy professor here now. But we didn't find anyone who could make the crossword puzzle, though it wouldn't have been very hard, because the definitions wouldn't have mattered.
Right. There's a cutout construction of a human being with slots and letters to be fitted into each other by the reader. I don't know.
Well, we did. I don't think it made the final book. I'm quite sure it didn't. But there was a Ingrid Superstar, who is one of the superstars. There was a cutout you could assemble, but I don't think it made the final. It
didn't make it in the final, but it's in one of the dummies, and I don't remember if it's 1, 2, or 3, but the 3 dummies are in the Williams collection here. Andy Warhol cutout mask. I think that would have been really great.
No, we didn't want to do that.
Follow the dots picture, which is also in a dummy, but didn't make it. Fill in the numbered square with color picture.
No, all those ideas.
Invisible ink.
Well, we do have a thing like that. This was discovered by the Graphics International Company, and Andy fell in love with this. And it really works, but I haven't been able to, I don't want to ruin my book to try it again. In the back, there are little Andy Warhol signatures on
perforated paper.
Here it is. And if you put these in water, the paper would dissolve, but the ink did not. So Andy's name would float on the surface of the water. It was wonderful, but I don't dare do it again, because I want to keep the book.
Yeah. And then, to which I add a new thought, something that glows in the dark.
That was my thought. That didn't really happen.
So then it seems you met a month later in April 20th, and I won't read all of these because this must have been a pretty intense meeting. It's 2 pages worth of notes of ideas. But one of the things that we've talked about that's so interesting with the book is that Andy likes the underground effect produced by using photostats rather than actual photographs for the reproductions. What does that mean? I mean, for those of us who may not have ever used photostats.
Well, there was a time before Xerox machines. I know this is amazing. And actually, the Xerox was quite a new toy when this book came out, but Random House was not using it to do art yet. We had one, which played a major role in this book, but when we made the first dummy, they just sent out to a Photoshop to have photostats made to show where the pictures would go. But Andy saw the photostats and said, oh, no, we don't want pictures, these are better. they're kind of muddy looking, so I wasn't at all sure he was right. But in retrospect, it's what Warhol things look like. But at the time, I was a little worried about that. But.
Yeah, but it's like you said, the sort of mistake ends up being more accurate than. Exactly. And there is, I promised I wouldn't throw you a curveball, so I hope this isn't one. But there is a letter in the records that. It's kind of a panicked letter that when the photos went out to the photostat place and they came back in, the receptionist was at lunch and the original photos were lost, and there's a note from David Paul, he can't find them, and I don't know if they ever were retrieved or not, since the photostats were used in the book.
I don't know, and I would guess that nobody else knows either, because I don't think there was a tremendous file-keeping system at the factory, but I would guess we found them. Yeah. Otherwise, I probably would have been fired.
I don't think so.
Well, maybe not there. Just had my salary cut even further.
So a couple other great ones here. So Warholian. It would be great shame, some feel, if Susan Bottomley did not have a full-page picture in the book, and I think that she does. It was agreed that there should be more big letters in the book. Alan and I will go through the manuscript, this is you writing, with the idea of finding short, pithy things that might be used in such big type displays. The lenticular cross should not be used.
I don't know what that was about.
Yeah, Alan will complete the crossword puzzle that doesn't work, which completes.
So it's Alan's fault.
It is Alan's fault. Andy would like to see more use of double-page spreads of similar pictures, spreads where the right-hand page shows a subject only a second or two after the picture on the left-hand page was taken. I agree that these could be very effective, and we see that with the Hunt's tomato paste, that's really beautiful. Everybody loved the magic slate, which didn't make it in.
Well, we just couldn't afford it. We were going to have remember magic slates where you would write and then you could, we couldn't afford to put that in.
Let's see, for the record, which is to be bound in, we decided that one side should be a new velvet's cut and the other, Ingrid, Andy, Susan, etc., discussing how wonderful Andy's book is.
Well, that came close to happening.
Right, so in addition to these notes, Chris wrote the most amazing press release I have ever read. One of them is written as an interview with himself, and then the other is sort of written as a children's book. And so this is from the interview version of the press release that says, is this, so the interviewer is asking you, is this a real record having to do, there's a disc, it has Lou Reed's face on it in the book, and it's right in front of a beautiful portrait of Nico. And you answer, actually, Andy wanted it to be blank, but we decided it wouldn't cost any more to have something on it. So we came to my apartment to record it with about 45 people. Andy doesn't go anywhere alone. A lot of them went into my bathroom and never came out. Andy is actually singing on the record, but there's no way of announcing that to the public. So.
Well, it was the most amazing experience. I'm a huge fan of the Velvet Underground, still am. I mean, their music was so far ahead of its time. And the fact that we have a Velvet Underground record in here is incredible, except there's no music on it. And all it is Andy invited the Velvet Underground to my apartment with, as I said, a whole lot of other people. And Andy showed them, or we all showed them, this book in progress, and they all just said, "Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. Oh, what's this?"
Nico says, "Oh, that's really nostalgic."
Yeah, Nico was very vocal about that. And there's absolutely, it's horrible. I mean, no one can listen to this, though it is here. You can listen to it if you want to, but I don't recommend it. But the idea that we had the Velvets there and they didn't make any music, but I still can't believe, because they weren't really that famous yet, that Lou Reed, John Cale, and Nico were sitting in my apartment, but they're talking about pop-ups.
There's also the story about the nose job, and I will add I have a little bit of story with that myself. So Chris will tell how the nose job, the do-it-yourself nose job, came to be part of the book. And when I visited Billy Name at his house in Poughkeepsie, he was appalled that I did not recognize the nose, who the nose belonged to. So I don't know if you want to give away whose nose it is, but you are all supposed to know.
But here is the nose job for those of you who haven't seen it. And you can do it yourself. You can peel off various parts of this nose in color. And this was the one art object that I was really part of, and it was incredibly exciting. Andy came to Random House where we had a Xerox machine, which he loved. And it was just me and Andy there. And my job was to keep Xeroxing different sized noses till he liked one. And I did not do a very good job. We had hundreds of noses, setting the reduction at 79, 78, 77. And he finally got the noses he wanted. And he would color them. And he colored them on the spot, though they were just sample colors. We used a processed ink to make them finally. And he was pasting them on this photograph to make sure they worked. And the photograph is of Bob Dylan, actually. But we weren't allowed to say that it was Bob Dylan because
libel, maybe.
Well, it might be, I don't know. But it was. But an amazing night.
So if you see, I think you can peek at the nose from one of the cases here. So see if you recognize it as Bob Dylan's. I couldn't.
Well, you might if you turn it sideways.
Billy was very disappointed. So the last thing I wanted to talk about with you, and I know you've seen this before, but hopefully there'll be some new surprises there. The book came out just before Thanksgiving in 1967, so it was intended to be a gift book for the holiday season. And there was a big book party, and the Village Voice coverage of the party and photos are on the wall there behind you. I guess there was aluminum or tin foil hung on the door and music piped in. The party was based off of the Farina party that had happened, I think, the year before.
For those who don't know, Richard Farina was a novelist, very promising novelist of that time, who I was lucky enough to work with as well. And we had a big party. Richard was married to Joan Baez's sister, Mimi. And we had a big party sort of like this, which was a huge hit. And wonderful book, by the way, still worth reading. And so we decided we could do it once, maybe we can do it twice. But Random House in those days was in an amazing building on Madison Avenue, which is now the entrance to the Palace Hotel. It was the Villard Mansion. And so it was a building that we shared with the Catholic Church. Random House was one wing, and the other two wings were the Archdiocese of New York. And the Cerf restaurant was there more recently, but at the time the space there was a parking lot, and there was an odd number of parking places. So my dad flipped a coin with Cardinal Spellman to see who got the extra one. And Random House won, I'm proud to say. But in any case, that's where this party was.
Wow. And this name is not on here, but I have also been so lucky to talk with Stephen Aronson, who was Warhol's editor for the philosophy
and
book.
worked at Random House at the time.
And he remembers coming to this party. So I think it was something that really made an impression upon him. I think he was, pretty, assistant editor or not too high up in the ranks. I think he may have even suggested that he snuck into the party.
I don't know, maybe.
I don't know, but...
Or he may have just stayed late from work.
Yeah, maybe. So this is the guest list. And when we first met, one of the things that was so amazing was that you just, flipped through this and you were able to recognize names and people that didn't make sense to me or that I wouldn't have known. So I thought for us all, if you wanted to, and there are check marks next to the people who accepted.
The other people who accepted. A lot of the really cool people didn't come, but I don't know really which ones to read.
Anybody who's, I know Barbara Walters is on there, and
a lot of people who are authors. Betsy Blackwell was the editor of Mademoiselle.
Did she come?
William Styron actually came. His picture is on there. I'm amazed that, and Terry Southern, who was one of my favorite writers ever and one of my favorite people, who wrote Dr. Strangelove, as many of you may know. But his picture's up there. But a lot of these people were, music people.
I think Norman Mailer was invited.
Yeah, his name isn't here, is it? No. But that doesn't mean...
Maybe he wasn't.
He wasn't a Random House author. Capote's name is here, but I know he didn't come. I don't know. It's hard to... Alan Rinzler, he showed up. I don't see Nat Finkelstein. Nat Finkelstein is not on here. Oh, he is. My gosh, I wonder if... No, it's Nat Finkelstein. No, maybe he did come.
Yeah, maybe.
That wouldn't have been a happy event.
And who was the man who invented Mad Libs? He was one.
Oh, Roger Price.
Yeah,
he was an absolute... wonder, that guy.
And there was another person who was this important sports writer who came.
Dick Schaap.
Yeah, who
was another author I worked with. Yeah. We did a book with Joe Namath that was, I had an awfully good time, as you can tell.
Well, it seemed like a pretty amazing party. I don't know if there are other...
you know who you're interested in more than I would know. So.
To me, it's just such a weird mix of people.
Well, that was the whole fun of it.
Yeah, David Burden is there. Capote doesn't come. Leo Castelli comes. Who else? There's some. Dorothy Dean signed.
Well, Dorothy Dean was a big part of Andy's world.
Yeah. Marcel Duchamp did not accept the invitation. Yeah.
I can't imagine why.
Well, if anyone wants to look at this, Henry Geldzahler came.
Well, he was a big part of Andy's life.
Of course, yeah. Some of there's just so... Yeah, Nat Finkelstein, there he is. Well, anyway, so if anyone would like to look at the guest list, we've got it with us here. And I think that we're happy to answer any questions. And we have to remember that there's a microphone that you're supposed to wait for because they are recording this. So any questions for either of us, we'd be happy to answer.
Great.
I wonder if either of you could say something about Warhol's lasting impact on publishing, whether artist books or for the mass market, visually or however.
The impact, is that, I didn't hear?
Yeah, it was his impact.
Well, you might be, I'll say a couple of things, but you probably know the whole work better than I do, or maybe Katie could answer some of that. But, well, as some of you may know, and it's here in the show, Andy was actually a book designer or a jacket designer before he was famous, but designed some wonderful, wonderful jackets and had many rejected as well, as you will also see here. I think as an author, his art, they were really more art things. Certainly this is more an art object than a book, really. And I don't think you'd say this book changed publishing in any way, but it was a wonderful occasion, which is, I think that's probably some of his other books. I doubt many people have read A from cover to cover.
No, I don't think many people.
But they were kind of art statements more than, so I don't think he was a major publishing figure exactly, but it's part of the art. And as that, I think it's important.
Yeah, I think that the impact maybe is yet to happen, or because people aren't thinking about Warhol in terms of publishing and his literary output or the books or what the books mean. It's been something that what I think is really amazing is when you look at his career, he was making books when he was in college. His first exhibition in New York City, his first solo exhibition, was actually a suite of illustrations for Truman Capote's novels. So his Other Voices, Other Rooms, his interest and involvement with publishing, whether it's illustration or his own books, or the magazine, Interview magazine, he was publishing from basically day one in New York City, and even books were published that were in the works after he died. But the last book he published during his lifetime was the America book in 1985. So I think the impact is kind of the other way around, that it's not that he made such an impact on the publishing industry or on literature, but literature and publishing had clearly a very strong impact on him, because I think that more integral or as integral to his process or the media that he used as painting or photography or film. I mean, it sustained.
Media of all kinds was what fascinated him, of course.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's wonderful in your exhibit here is that the full circle of his doing early illustrations for Capote and then the incredible silk screens of Capote. If you haven't seen those, that's one of the most striking things. I'd never seen those before. Amazing to see.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy and Chris, for a really great talk. Minor question, but you talk about the 3 different dummies for index book. Could you talk a little bit about how it ended up as one, like what editorial decisions were made, who picked a piece from here or there? How did that all come about from 3 to 1?
Chris, you have to talk about your note to David Paul, your disagreement.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so
one of the dummies, I had forgotten this, but I saw it here today, that one of the notes, David says, I think this is getting boring. And I wrote back, I disagree, David. But he might have been right, I don't know. But as you can tell from what we've said already, this book was more a process than a beginning to end idea. So David, who did a lot of things, when we had boxes and boxes of photographs, and we knew which ones Billy liked, and we knew which ones Andy liked for sure, and we knew which of the pop-up things that Andy liked best, but we had lots of different ones to try. And the only way to try to put this together was to just start doing it. And David Paul, the designer at Random House, had that job to try different spreads that we'd agreed on in different order, and we had far too much. So we would put something together, and then all these people at the factory and all of us would comment on it, and some things would survive, and other things would get lost. Some things would survive, and then we'd find out that the Japanese company couldn't produce them, or that they couldn't be done in time. So then,
or very expensive.
They cost. Some of like the Magic Slate was too expensive. Other things just never got done. The crossword puzzle that we mentioned nobody ever did it. So eventually, by dummy number 4, I guess we had a book. Or we decided that we had no more time to keep fussing with it.
And one thing about dummy number 4, I mean, there are 3 dummies here, and you have a sort of dummy also in your private collection.
Which is closer to the finished book.
Yeah, and I think that in the Random House records, there's mention of, they wanted to get advance reviews, right, to get some press for the publicity for the book, but you couldn't send anyone the galleys because they had to make the book. So I think that the mechanical for the book was maybe sent out to a couple of.
We had one without printing. We had the planing things just made out of paper, which is really neat, actually. This is one of the covers that I found, and I showed you this before, which went on here. It eventually ended up being silver rather than red, but really, it just came from Japan, and that's what we got. So nobody really knew. There was a funny review in the Washington Post about how dangerous the book was, because this little thing had a powerful rubber band in it, and when you open this page, this thing would pop out and hit you in the face. And the lawyers actually worried that somebody was going to get hurt and sue them.
Oh, and do you want to play the squeak?
Oh yes, there is a squeaking accordion that still works in my book, much to my amazement, but can I find it is the question. Here it is. Still working. Get it near the microphone.
And it's a photograph of Ondine, who is the protagonist in a novel, and there's some photographs in the book of Andy tape recording Ondine, because that book is in, quote, unedited transcript of 24 Hours with Ondine. And what I think is really amazing is that they started working on a novel, started taping in the year before this book was started to put together, and it's dropped off on a novel because the editors at Grove Press weren't that interested in the book at the time. Finished this book, and then Arnold Leo found the manuscript for a novel in the editorial editorial files at Grove Press and picked it up. So this is sandwiched in between the making of that book, and it includes all these pieces, Ondine and the photographs.
And there's a picture in this book of Ondine's arm on which is superimposed the tattoo of left to right, top to bottom from Akihito Shirakawa. So it all goes together. And another weird coincidence, which has no value except pure coincidence, I have a little house out in Springs, Long Island, and there's a sign across on the house across saying A. Leo, and it turns out to be Arnold Leo. I had no idea that he's the one who found the A script. So
it's been great.
Small world.
I mean, and to go back to your question about the impact and the literary side of things, that these editors were so important. I mean, they were part of the whole collaborative process of creating these books, and I am so feel so lucky to be able to talk to all of you, and it surprises me that no one's hunted you down yet, but hey, I'm glad.
You know what's interesting that we didn't talk about, that what you said just made me think of, is one of the things that was really incredible about Andy is the factory itself and the culture of the factory, and that a lot of these people were, I want to put it right because I like them, but they were not all what would be called normal people. They were strange. They were either really shy, or some of them had drug problems. Some had various sexual identities that might not have been popular at the time, but they had a home there and they could work there, and Andy believed in their work, and a lot of them became important artists afterward, poets, writers, artists, and strangely enough, again, a connection for me, Jim Henson, in a very different way, did the same thing. Because both these people, who were geniuses in different ways, weren't afraid to have other talented people around them. And I think that's what's so wonderful about Warhol in many ways, is that he allowed this whole community of people who might not have found a home otherwise to flourish.
And my sense is that, you know, it worked at the factory. It was so creative and productive. And then I think he just sort of usurped Random House and Grove Press when he did his, for the people, I mean, allow whatever, you know, Wally Hunt or you, or, you know, like he just sort of brought you into the factory for that moment of that project, and then went along the way, you know.
And strangely enough, I married someone that Naomi knew very well, who was part of all this, so I never met her at the time. Yeah.
And she's on the tapes for a novel. So
I have to ask a question. They're like these little miniature masterpieces, so my questions are about publication. So how many did you print out altogether? Did you have more than one edition? And how much did they cost when they came out?
Well, we have to add. We have the price here. We can answer. We can answer that.
You mean the price to make it or the price to sell it? This book is $4.95, if you can believe it. I mean, you couldn't possibly do that now. And it has a peel-off label, which is very much like the banana on the
oh yeah, the Rolling Stone.
For a different purpose, yeah. But
so this is an ad that was luckily shared with us from an audience member just before, so we can tell you the price, which is the cloth bound was $12.95 and the paperback was $4.95, as you said. And then there's mention of a limited signed edition, and we couldn't really remember.
I think they just put it in a box and Andy signed it and put a number on it.
And maybe put a print or put something in there.
Well, he rubber stamped it probably. Yeah. A lot of things that became art because Andy would stamp them. I have one of my prized possessions actually is the Paris Review had a series of posters by famous artists, and Andy was asked to do one, and he asked George Plimpton for a liquor bill that said Paris Review on it, because the Paris Review had a lot of famous parties, and the Paris Review would order liquor. So he got one of those old bills that has two little holes at the top where you would put them in. I haven't seen one of those in years. And it says Paris Review, 2 bottles of scotch, 1 bottle of Drambuie or something. And Andy blew it up and rubber stamped it, and that was his poster. Yeah. And then they cut out the hole. So it's fantastic. It's hanging on my wall. And one of my favorite things, but it was just a found item, as usual.
Yeah. I think that the book was printed in over 1,000 copies.
Oh, there
were
was,
printed.
I think it might have been 10 or so.
10,000.
But we knew it would be very hard to reprint it. Because, in fact, one of the biggest fears was that the ship would sink on the way from Japan.
And there was a storm at sea that delayed it.
We did lose a pop-up book later when I was at Sesame Street. There was a ship that sunk full of pop-up books headed for Random House, but this one made it. But it was very expensive to make. And so we printed more than we thought we might need, and I doubt we sold them all, but we might have. Yeah. We might well have. By now we would have, because they become collector's items. Right. And I know Wally Hunt he knew that they would be valuable, so he kept quite a few hundred of them in his basement. Yeah.
And it's never been reprinted, so this
I don't think you could. I mean,
that's what we were talking about in the car.
Because of all the pop-ups and squeakers and a lot of things here don't work anymore. But there was a spring with a thing that twirled on it, and the balloon and that dissolving paper. It would be hard to reproduce it.
Yeah. Thank you again so much. Thank you, Cerf.